The mid-July sun beat down on Summerwood estates, baking the meticulously manicured lawns to a uniform, straw-like gold. But around the community pool, a different kind of warmth permeated the air. The warmth of collective anticipation. For 3 long, sweltering weeks, the crown jewel of Summerwood had been a sterile, empty pit, its azure tiles replaced by a patchwork of raw concrete, exposed pipes, and the constant hum of construction machinery. Today, however, was different. Today, the new filtration system was being installed, the final, crucial step before the eagerly awaited refill and grand reopening. Arthur Henderson, the HOA president, a man whose receding hairline and perpetually furrowed brow spoke volumes of his tireless, often thankless, dedication, stood by the pool's edge, a clipboard clutched like a shield. Beside him, Maria Rodriguez, the newish HOA secretary, a whirlwind of efficiency and nervous energy, adjusted her sunglasses, her phone already poised to capture the moment. The air thrummed with the low, satisfying rumble of the concrete mixer and the rhythmic clang of tools. 2 burly men in sweat-stained t-shirts were meticulously lowering a massive, gleaming white filtration unit into its designated pit. It was a symphony of progress, a testament to months of contentious board meetings, budget battles, and endless resident complaints. "Looking good, gentlemen," Arthur called out, his voice thin but laced with a genuine, if weary, triumph. "Almost there. Just this unit, and then the final pressure tests tomorrow, right?" One of the workers, a man named Leo with a sun-weathered face and a perpetually quizzical expression, nodded, wiping his brow with the back of a gloved hand. "That's the plan, Mr. Henderson. If all goes well, you'll be swimming by the weekend." A collective sigh of relief, audible only in the slight relaxation of shoulders among the small gathering of curious residents, seemed to ripple through the morning heat. Kids, home from school, pressed their faces against the fence, their shouts of "When can we swim?" punctuated the otherwise professional atmosphere. Mrs. Gable, a spry octogenarian who lived for her morning water aerobics, clapped her hands together, a rare smile creasing her face. Even Mr. Tanaka, the community's resident curmudgeon, offered a curt nod. Progress was a tangible thing, a promise about to be delivered. Then it shattered. Not a pipe, not a tile, but the very fabric of the morning's tranquility. It began as a distant, high-pitched wail, unmistakable in its raw, unfiltered fury. It grew, quickly, a banshee's cry tearing through the suburban calm. Heads turned, first in confusion, then in dawning recognition. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Arthur muttered, his brow deepening into a familiar valley of dread. Maria's phone clattered to the ground, forgotten. Rounding the corner of the clubhouse, a figure emerged, propelled by a momentum that seemed less like walking and more like a force of nature. It was Karen Albright. Her usually perfectly coiffed blonde bob was askew, strands escaping in wild disarray around a face contorted by a furious, almost manic intensity. Her eyes, usually a cold, calculating blue, were now wide, glassy, and fixed on the pool. And in her right hand, held aloft like a medieval weapon, was a claw hammer. Not a small, delicate one, but a hefty, well-worn tool, its steel head catching the sunlight in a malevolent gleam. A collective gasp swept through the onlookers. The workers, midway through maneuvering the heavy filtration unit, froze. Leo, who had just been about to give a final push, recoiled, his eyes wide with alarm. "Stop! All of you, stop!" Karen shrieked, her voice hoarse, each syllable laced with a venom that made the air vibrate. She covered the distance to the pool's edge in a flurry of angry strides, her sensible walking shoes kicking up dust. Her target wasn't Arthur, or Maria, or any of the residents. Her gaze was locked on the glistening, newly installed pipework, the fresh, pristine white of the PVC contrasting starkly with the rough concrete around it. "Karen, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" Arthur finally found his voice, a strained bellow that was quickly drowned out by the rising murmur of the crowd. She didn't answer him. Her breath hitched, ragged and fast, as she reached the edge of the pit where the filter unit was now suspended, just inches from its base. Without hesitation, with a terrifying, almost primal scream of "Traitors!" she swung the hammer. The first blow landed with a sickening crack against a thick, newly cemented PVC elbow joint, sending shards of white plastic flying like shrapnel. A collective scream from the onlookers mingled with the horrified cries of the construction workers. Leo lunged forward, but he was too slow. Whack. Another blow, aimed lower, connected with a sharp, piercing sound, puncturing the main return line with a sickening gush. Water, still. The silence that descended upon the pool area after Karen Albright's departure was not a peaceful one. It was heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth, shattered plastic, and collective disbelief. Arthur Henderson stood rooted to the spot, his clipboard still clutched, but now dangling uselessly by his side. His gaze drifted from the splintered PVC pipes, now weeping a slow, steady drip, to the gleaming filtration unit, precariously tilted in the muddy crater of what was meant to be its secure foundation. The sunlight, once so promising, felt oppressive, highlighting the chaos Karen had wrought. Arthur, are you all right?" Maria's voice, a thin, reedy whisper, cut through the stupor. She had backed away, hands pressed to her chest, her face pale beneath her sunglasses. Her phone lay abandoned on the concrete, its screen cracked from the fall. Arthur finally blinked, forcing himself to acknowledge the disaster. "No, Maria. No, I'm not. Nobody is." He turned to Leo and Miguel, the two construction workers, who stood surveying the damage with a mix of fury and resignation. "Leo, Miguel, I am so sorry. What can we do? Is it salvageable?" Leo kicked at a loose piece of concrete. "Salvageable? Mr. Henderson, she destroyed the main lines, ripped up the fresh concrete, and God knows what else under there. We'll have to pull the unit back out, dig out all this mud, and basically start from scratch on this section. This isn't a few hours of work. This is days, weeks maybe. And the cost? Forget about it." His voice was low, strained with barely suppressed anger. "We had to shut off the main municipal feed to the entire building to stop the flooding. You've got residents who can't even flush their toilets right now." The gravity of the situation hit Arthur like a physical blow. Not just the pool, but the entire community's water supply. His weary triumph of moments ago twisted into a bitter knot of despair. "I'll call the police. Right now." He fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking as he scrolled for the non-emergency number. As Arthur made the call, the residents who had gathered began to disperse, their whispers growing louder. "Crazy Karen, I always knew she was off," someone muttered. "But this is insane." Another voice, more cautious, ventured, "Did anyone hear what she said? Toxic chemicals? Cover-up?" That question hung in the air, a faint, unsettling echo, quickly dismissed by others who preferred the simpler narrative of a deranged neighbor. Within 20 minutes, 2 squad cars from the Summerwood Police Department pulled up. Officer Miller, a burly, no-nonsense veteran with a perpetually tired expression, was the first out. He surveyed the scene, the broken pipes, the waterlogged concrete, the distraught construction workers, with a practiced eye that had seen everything from petty vandalism to domestic disputes. "All right, Mr. Henderson," Miller began, pulling out a notepad. "What exactly happened here?" Arthur recounted the events, trying to keep his voice steady, even as the humiliation of the incident burned in his chest. Maria added her frantic, often overlapping, details. Leo and Miguel gave their professional assessment of the damage. Officer Miller listened, his pen scratching across the paper, his gaze occasionally drifting towards the path Karen had taken. "So, Ms. Albright, armed with a hammer, came out here and intentionally damaged HOA property, causing significant delays and costs." Miller summarized, his tone flat. "And she was shouting about toxic chemicals and cover-ups?" "That's exactly right," Arthur confirmed, exhaling slowly. "It was unhinged. Completely unprovoked." Miller nodded, closing his notepad. Right. Well, this is clearly a case of destruction of private property and a public nuisance. Given her statements, there might be some mental health issues at play here. We'll go speak to Ms. Albright, get her side of the story. She'll be facing charges, Mr. Henderson, that much I can tell you. For now, try to secure the area and get the water back on. We'll be in touch. As the officers drove away, Arthur felt a perverse sense of emptiness. Justice, or at least the start of it, was being pursued, but it offered no comfort for the ruined pool or the bewildered community. He spent the next hour coordinating with the contractors, arranging for emergency water shut-off notices to be posted, and trying to appease angry residents calling the HOA office about their lack of running water. Maria, surprisingly, found a reserve of strength, calmly handling the flood of calls while Arthur dealt with the immediate crisis. That evening, the emergency HOA board meeting was not merely contentious, it was an outright circus. The community clubhouse, usually reserved for bingo nights and low-key social gatherings, was packed to the gills. Every chair was taken, and residents stood along the walls, their faces a mix of outrage, fear, and morbid curiosity. The faded memo, with its chilling preliminary water quality report, anomalies detected, felt heavier than lead in Arthur Henderson's hand. The comfortable silence of his study now hummed with a nascent dread, replacing the calm he usually found in the quiet hours of the night. He dismissed Officer Miller's clinical assessment of Karen's state, clearly unwell. Was she? Or had they, the HOA, been too quick to dismiss her because the truth was simply too inconvenient, too terrifying? His mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Karen's toxic chemicals scream, her cover-up accusation, the sheer, visceral terror in her eyes. It had felt like the ravings of a mad woman. Now, with this flimsy, yellowed paper, a different, far more disturbing picture began to form. Arthur knew he couldn't go to the current board. Not yet. They would dismiss it, just as he had initially dismissed Karen. They would prioritize damage control and optics, not an ancient, potentially explosive secret. He needed more. He needed proof. His first thought was Mr. Peterson, the HOA president from nearly 2 decades ago. Peterson had long since moved out of Summerwood Estates, but Arthur vaguely remembered an address in a neighboring town, gleaned from old transition documents. It was a long shot, but if anyone could shed light on this memo, it was him. The next morning, the anger from the community hit Arthur like a second wave. The water was back on, but the pool remained a construction disaster zone, and the emergency repair notices were met with skepticism and frustration. His phone rang incessantly with complaints about the noise, the dust, and the ongoing inconvenience. Maria, bless her, was a trooper, fielding most of the calls, but even her cheerful demeanor was starting to fray around the edges. Arthur, Mrs. Jenkins just called again, Maria said, poking her head into his makeshift office, the community center's utility closet. She wants to know when the pool will be open. Her kids are going stir-crazy. And Mr. Tanaka is threatening to withhold his HOA dues until this whole mess is sorted. Tell them I'm doing everything I can, Maria, Arthur replied, his voice tight. He was trying to appear busy, poring over blueprints, but his mind was elsewhere, fixated on the address he'd found for Peterson. We're escalating the repairs. We've hired an additional crew. A lie, but a necessary one, he thought. That afternoon, under the guise of visiting an old friend, Arthur drove across town to the quiet, tree-lined street where Mr. Peterson now resided. He found the house easily, a meticulously maintained ranch-style home, every bit as orderly as Arthur remembered Peterson himself. Peterson, a man now in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and kind, albeit slightly rheumy, eyes, greeted Arthur with surprise and a hesitant smile. Arthur Henderson, is that you? Goodness, what a blast from the past. Come in, come in. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? They settled into Peterson's sunroom, tea cooling on a small table between them. Arthur initially made small talk about Summerwood Estates, the usual gossip and updates, carefully steering the conversation towards the topic of pool maintenance during Peterson's tenure. Finally, with a deep breath, he pulled out the faded memo. Peterson's eyes, which had been warm and nostalgic, narrowed slightly as he took the paper. His fingers, gnarled with age, traced the faded heading. A flicker of something unreadable, recognition? Unease? Crossed his face. "Ah, yes," Peterson said, his voice softer, almost reflective. This takes me back. The anomalies detected report. From that independent water quality survey we commissioned after the initial construction, remember?" Arthur shook his head. "No, Mr. Peterson, I don't. This was before my time. The report mentions trace contaminants and recommends a full system flush and pipe replacement. What exactly were these contaminants? And why wasn't a full replacement done then?" Peterson sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "It was complicated, Arthur. The contaminants were negligible, truly. Just trace elements of lead and copper, typical of older pipes, exacerbated by some hard water in that one section. Nothing immediately dangerous, the expert said. The recommendation for replacement was more a preventative measure for the long term, not an urgent necessity. But it was recommended," Arthur pressed, his heart pounding. "Why just a cleaning?" Peterson leaned back, his gaze distant. "The cost, Arthur. Always the cost. We had just finished the initial construction, over budget as it was. The community coffers were bare. A full pipe replacement would have been millions. The board at the time, myself included, made the difficult decision to go with the deep clean and monitor closely approach. We truly believed it was sufficient, that the experts reassure. The purplish-black discoloration on the section of old pipe gleamed malevolently in the dimming light, a stark, terrifying contradiction to Peterson's casual dismissal. Arthur Henderson's finger, still tracing the slimy residue, recoiled as if burned. The metallic, acrid smell seemed to cling to the air, a silent scream of warning. Karen's frantic words, once dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind, now echoed with chilling clarity. "You're trying to poison us." "What is that, Leo?" Arthur's voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the clamor of his thoughts. His eyes darted between the pipe and Maria's pale, concerned face. Leo, who had been methodically setting aside other, cleaner sections of pipe, looked grim. "I don't know, Mr. Henderson. I've seen a lot of corrosion in old plumbing, but never anything quite like this. It's sticky, and the color is off, like something's been festering in here for a long time." He nudged it with his boot. "Found it right near where Ms. Albright was hitting, in the main return line from the deep end." Maria, ever practical, though visibly shaken, took a step back. "Should we call someone? A hazmat team? The city?" Arthur hesitated. "The city. The HOA. They would demand answers, demand a formal report. And if Peterson's account was even partly true, if this was a slow, 20-year accumulation of negligible contaminants, the panic in Summerwood Estates would be catastrophic. He envisioned the headlines, the lawsuits, the total collapse of their property values. He also thought of the current HOA board, more concerned with budgets and appearances than hidden dangers. They would try to bury it, just as the previous board had, albeit for different reasons. He couldn't trust them with this. Not yet. He needed undeniable, independent proof. "No," Arthur said, his voice gaining a sudden, quiet resolve. He looked at Leo. "Leo, can you secure this pipe section for me? Don't let anyone else touch it. Don't let anyone else see it. Can you do that?" Leo's eyes, usually tired, sharpened with understanding. He looked at the pipe, then at Arthur, then at Maria. "You think she was right?" he asked, his voice low. Arthur didn't answer directly. He knelt down, pulling a clean plastic bag from Leo's toolbox. "Just put it in here, Leo. Double bag it. And keep it somewhere safe. Very safe. No one, not even Miguel, should know about this particular piece. Leo, sensing the immense gravity in Arthur's tone, nodded slowly. He carefully placed the discolored pipe section into the bag, tied it securely, and then handed it to Arthur. "Consider it done, Mr. Henderson. My lips are sealed." Maria watched, her expression a mix of trepidation and curiosity. "Arthur, what are you going to do?" He looked at her, his jaw set. "I'm going to find out what this is. Independently. Before anyone else has a chance to explain it away." He gestured vaguely towards the ruined pool. "This mess, it's a cover. A very inconvenient, very expensive cover. But it buys us time." Over the next few days, Arthur moved with a new, almost obsessive purpose. He maintained his public facade of the overwhelmed HOA president, fielding calls, attending to repair logistics, and assuring residents that progress was being made. But in the quiet hours, his true mission consumed him. The first hurdle was finding a testing lab. He couldn't use any local or state-affiliated labs. That would immediately raise red flags. After hours of discreet online searching, using burner email addresses and encrypted connections, he found a small, independent environmental testing firm 3 states away. They specialized in obscure industrial contaminants and promised absolute confidentiality, for a hefty price. He wired them a significant portion of his emergency savings. Maria, meanwhile, became his unwitting accomplice. She saw the change in him, the tightly wound energy, the secretive phone calls, the late nights spent hunched over his laptop. One afternoon, finding him staring blankly at the bagged pipe section he'd hidden in the back of the HOA supply closet, she finally confronted him. "Arthur, you're not sleeping," she said gently, her voice low. "And you're acting different. Is this about the pipe?" He looked at her, weighing his options. Maria was loyal, perhaps too trusting, but her administrative skills and calm demeanor were invaluable. He decided to trust her. He slowly unzipped the bag, revealing the discolored pipe. "Maria," he began, his voice hoarse. "I spoke to Peterson. He said it was just negligible lead and copper, typical corrosion. But this..." He pointed to the dark stains. "This isn't just corrosion. I've sent it to an independent lab for testing, out of state. I need to know. For sure." Maria's eyes widened as she stared at the pipe. The color drained from her face. "You think Karen was right?" she whispered, the question hanging heavy in the air. "I don't know what to think, Art." The laboratory report lay open on Arthur's desk, its stark, clinical language painting a picture more terrifying than any fictional horror. Elevated levels of industrial solvent byproducts. Traces of heavy metals exceeding safe limits by a factor of 10. Evidence consistent with prolonged low-level exposure. The words swam before his eyes, each one a hammer blow to his carefully constructed world. It wasn't just lead and copper. It was something far more sinister. And it had been festering in the Summerwood Estates pool for 2 decades. He reread the conclusion, his breath catching in his throat. While immediate acute toxicity is low, chronic exposure, particularly through skin absorption and incidental ingestion, poses a significant long-term health risk, including but not limited to neurological damage and increased cancer risk. Neurological damage, cancer risk. The faces of the children splashing in the pool, the elderly doing their water aerobics, the teenagers lounging by the edge, they all flashed before his eyes. Brenda Jenkins's kids, Mrs. Gable, even Mr. Tanaka. They had all been swimming in this silent, invisible poison. And Karen, wild-eyed and desperate, had tried to tell them. His first instinct was to scream, to run into the street and tear down the pool closed for repairs sign, replacing it with a giant, flashing warning. But then the cold, hard reality set in. Panic would engulf the community. Lawsuits would fly. Property values would plummet to zero. And the current HOA board, a group whose collective spines seemed to have atrophied from years of mundane bureaucracy, would crumble. He, Arthur Henderson, HOA president, would be at the epicenter of the biggest public health scandal Summerwood had ever seen. He knew he couldn't act rashly. He needed a plan, a way to expose the truth without causing utter chaos, a way to protect his community without destroying it. And the first step had to be Karen. She wasn't crazy. She was a witness, a victim, and she was locked away. The next morning, Arthur called the Summerwood Police Department, specifically asking for Officer Miller. He spoke calmly, concisely, requesting permission to visit Karen Albright at the psychiatric facility where she was being held. He cited his role as HOA president, his concern for a community member, and the desire to understand the root of her recent distress. Miller, probably relieved to offload a difficult resident, granted it, albeit with a skeptical tone. The facility was sterile, quiet, and unsettling. Arthur was led to a small, brightly lit visiting room. Karen was already there, sitting ramrod straight on a plastic chair, her hands folded primly in her lap. Her hair was still disheveled, her eyes still held that unsettling intensity, but the frantic edge was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost eerie, resignation. "Hello, Karen," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly steady. He pulled up a chair opposite her. She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "You know, don't you?" Her voice was flat, devoid of the previous rage. "You finally looked. You finally listened." Arthur swallowed hard. I found something, Karen. An old memo. And then, I got the pipes tested." A flicker of something, vindication? Sorrow, crossed her face. "The purple gunk. I saw it when they started pulling the old sections out, before your contractors arrived that day. I saw it coming from the deep end pipe. It wasn't just rust. And then I remembered." "Remembered what, Karen?" Arthur leaned forward, his urgency barely contained. "The smell," she whispered, her eyes distant. "It started subtly years ago. A faint, chemical smell like antiseptic after they'd cleaned the pool. Then it got stronger, especially in the deep end. I brought it up at an HOA meeting years ago, but they just said it was new cleaning chemicals. They dismissed me. They always dismiss me." A bitter edge returned to her voice. "But I swim laps every day, Arthur. Hour after hour. My skin felt wrong. And I started getting these headaches, fuzzy thinking. I thought I was losing my mind." She paused, then looked at him, her eyes filled with a fresh wave of pain. "Then my dog, Daisy, she always loved the pool water. She'd sneak sips when I wasn't looking. Last year, she got sick. The vet couldn't figure it out. Liver damage. Kidney failure. They said it was old age, but she was barely 7. A single tear tracked a path down her cheek. I started putting it together. The smell. My headaches. Daisy. And then, when I saw that gunk on the pipes, I knew. I just knew what they were covering up." Her voice rose, barely audible. "I tried to tell everyone. I sent emails, I called the office, I put notes on the bulletin board. No one listened. You all laughed. You called me crazy, Karen." Her eyes hardened. "So I did the only thing I could think of. I had to stop them. Had to break it open. Had to make you see." Arthur felt a profound wave of shame wash over